Welcome, everyone. We are here for the release reading for Amanda Hartzell's Glowing Animals. I could not be more excited to be here with you all tonight. My name is MJ Malpidi. I'm from Game Over Books. You are in for an absolute treat. I really appreciate you all coming here, taking a breath with us, taking a moment outside of all the craziness in the world, and just to be reminded why it is that we're out here trying to live and trying to be the best people that we can be, trying to sing the siren songs that we know we want to sing, trying to be the glowing animals that we damn know we are, right? So with that, I am so excited to introduce Amanda Hartzell. I just want to get right into it so we can get into these incredible poems. And so with that, I need to pull up your bio. Oh, I should have done this already. Amanda Hartzell is a writer and artist. Her work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of the Net and appears in Breakwater Review, Carve Magazine, Crab Creek Review, and New Letters, among others. She holds an MFA from Emerson College in Boston. Originally from Eastern Pennsylvania, she lives and writes in Seattle with her husband, son, daughter, and their dog. Please give it up for Amanda Hartzell. Let me bring you up here.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate the support. MJ, thank you for hosting. It's really nice to meet you in person at AWP. Want to thank Josh and Game Over Books for publishing this book and running a press that supports amazing writers, and Christy for your insightful edits and your friendship, and Catherine Weiss for this incredible cover. And thank you to all my friends and family for being here, especially my sisters. Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the book's concept, Glowing Animals. I started this book 2.5 years ago. We were all kind of re-entering the world post-pandemic. We had, in Seattle, we had a lot of heat waves, a lot of wildfire smoke from BC and California and Western Washington. And I started thinking about how differently time moved during those months and how pressurized time felt, and how strange re-entering the world seemed. I remember meeting friends out for pizza the first time that we all got to get back together, and it felt like dropping in on a sitcom of our previous selves. It was just so odd. So I started working on poems that were about that, and then taking the concept of heat and time, pressurized creates light, it creates incandescence, just how like a basic light bulb works. But heat and time can also create drought. So most of these poems have those elements: heat, time, light, drought, and what you do with pressure that's both external and self-inflicted. There's also a lot of fairy tale tropes, wolves and woods and bees and fire and children, and I'll explain some of those as they come on. And one last note before I start reading, I'm going to give a brief intro for each poem, and I will talk a little bit about the poets I was reading when writing that kind of informed what I was thinking. But I really think that most art works better without a full explanation up front. I don't like a lot of hand-holding. That way the audience can discover and experience the poem just innately without preconception. And I think if I read a poem and explain it, and then you get something entirely different from it, I think that's actually great. I think that means that you're bringing your own life to the work and you're engaging in a conversation with it. And that's what makes all art living, breathing things. So I'm going to start with my first poem called Funhouse Year. I wanted to start the book with a poem that was about fear and stagnation, and then dislodge from those elements and those themes as the poems continue in the book, and gets to something more vulnerable as the book moves on. Funhouse Year. We get up before sunrise and treat our bodies like the leaking machines they are. We know all ingredients before guzzling the dark bottle. Each key matches lock. Outside, orange groves bloom cool and patient. Our lovers approach us like the edge of a lake. In mirrors, we scroll through news without a fresh and wild depression. We appreciate spicy food and silent movies. At parties, we forget whether we are the hosts. This year, we live in houses nibbled from a pink and candied dream where some days we are gymnasts, next psychics. What I mean is, our bodies move with purpose, physical and perceived, being and mind. Welcome. We don't know yet if movement does not change the house. This year, we enter a room and find a door, so we enter the room and find a door. The next poem I'll read was really inspired by my favorite poet, Richard Steichen, who I discovered as a college freshman. I just randomly pulled a book off the shelf, and this is why I'm here. This is just fate. I don't know. But he has a poem called Litany, in which certain things are crossed out, and it's strange and surreal poem, but it's so tactile too. It's like such a cool trick that he's able to pull off. And it's essentially a poem about a scorned lover, but it's in the shape of a fairy tale. And there's a lot of humor to it, but it's also devastating. And I've always been trying to create that in a poem. My favorite line from it is, okay, so I'm the dragon, big deal. You still get to be the hero. You get magic gloves, a fish that talks. You get eyes like flashlights. I make you pancakes, I take you hunting. I talk to you as if you're really there. And this was me reaching to create a poem that was sort of like that. And this is also where the heart of this whole book came from. California without makeup. I do, says the woman to the future. The cake howls when cut, but she licks icing from ringed finger, not knowing black seeds don't take in the garden or root in champagne and armpits of lace. She does not see the warm bodies burrowed in pine needles and down who kill for their young, but begins hearing them flee at night and finds their fur and puts tufts in her mouth as if she too carries a child. One promise of heat and time is incandescence, another droughts and more months. A dry wind will come inside the house, testing doors. When the bedroom catches fire, she wakes like a little mission town, abandoned in orange hills. The next one I'll read is very early on when I began writing this. It's a poem about hubris and privilege and like a delusion of infallibility. It's called Riot Party. The heat wave cooked a million shellfish alive in their beds, and we stand by the kitchen fan grating lemon, rind shaved fine and wet by pink fingers. Hair up sweaty while black shells gape open, fleshy bodies laid out on ice. Too late to know whether you've ordered sick oysters or if it was a bad time for a clam bake. The hour-eating fire and tree fronds over raked coals, a waste. Chitin and sugar kelp exposed at a low tide, a warning. Fooled by the citrus evening and its Tabasco sun, the party swells. Everyone shows up like they own the soft mess of their bodies, their pale hunger and illness, like they won't one eager summer they cleaned and cracked open. In this collection, I wanted to write a poem with a very intentional certain opening line that was a little like breaking the fourth wall, that made it clear that I was a writer handing something to the reader. I think Kurt Vonnegut does this so great in the beginning of Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a book I've always been obsessed with, when he says, listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. And I like that when you're reminded that you have a narrator and you remember its story, because something about a story seems timeless and sacred, and it feels like it's been given to you and entrusted to you. It was so funny. I was reading Stregonona, the old Tommy DePaolo book, to my kids, and he does it in there too, where right before a character is about to make a terrible decision, the narration says, and this is what happened. And it's just so transparent and direct and funny and startling. And I've always wanted to write something like that. So that's where the beginning of this comes from. Nighttime is to nectar as fable is to fox. This is how it will happen. Deer not knowing which way the river runs, moon out like a lamp at the end of the hall. Finches tropical panic inside a winter porch, and then you arrive, stealthy as the fox who winds out of dead legends. Sweet-spoken thief, curled up like smoke in my home, and belonging to no one. Prying open your throat for my name, I find only a belly full of honey, as well as the bees. The next poem I have is called Beginning, and I was honestly really tempted to make that the last poem in the book, because that just seemed so wonderful to end on a poem called Beginning and give the whole book a feeling of like a Mobius strip, just continuing again. I didn't, but I think I'm constantly re-editing everything. So there's part of me that does wish I would have put it there, but we're committing to it being on page 8, not the end of the poem. So this is a poem about mismemory and how we sort of lie to ourselves to make things look pretty. I was reading at the time Kaveh Akbar, his poem "My Kingdom for a Murmur of Fanfare." It's sort of a poem about waking up in the middle of your life and just finding how mundane it is. And kind of a shock. It was like, oh, this is my life. This is so boring. And there's a line where he compares it to walking into the yard and finding a falconer's glove, whole hand still inside. It's just brilliant and strange and lovely. So this poem is called Beginning. Birds are pieces cut out of morning, the arch of your body still in my palm. Is it really so simple? Wind downing power, crumbs on a knife, the storm, the appetite, away we revise the beginning until the soap you leave on the towel is a fortune, the toothpaste in the sink ocean foam for us, the glowing animals no one has seen yet, no one has named. Along with all the cute poems and the light poems and drought poems in this book, there's also a little cluster of daughter poems. I was pregnant with my daughter at the time. So a lot of that was coming out too. So this is a poem about wanting to shelter people and knowing that we can't. And a poem about casting a reverse spell. In fairy tales, there's so many curses that are cast all the time. So I wanted to write something that was not to curse, but to protect. This is called Fairy Tales Revised During Ultrasound. Don't let little birds dress you with scraps of cottage fabric smelling like persimmon and cinder and garlic bread. Sweep past mice who chitter in winter walks of the tower, desolate and intended for you. Leave pumpkins and Macintosh rotting in the garden, overrun damp with impatient nightfall. When you get your turn, show up barefoot and track mud through the castle. Return to ancient woods where trees devour the night alive and call yourself sequoia, sycamore. No, even in cradle, nothing can curse or claim you. Your heart will not beat under stained glass and an ivy siege. The next poem is a bookend to that. It's not just a daughter poem. I think it's a woman poem, where I wanted to write something that was about not settling, about allowing yourself to be smarter and more clever than you think you're allowed to be. This is called Almanac. If you become the woman zapped into laurels by a jealous demigod, don't wait around the underworld planting tulip bulbs. Better practice being a bad animal that digests food alive and stalks small life still wet from birth. But never send helicopters after wolves. Snakes won't make you stone. When a hard day rolls up in its wooden horse and everyone shouts grief and love, remember frost can't kill a winter seed, and another word for tame is break. So in the book, there is a lot of light imagery. There's fire, sun, morning. This idea of re-entering the world, even if the world is still burning. How do you do that? How do you sit with pain and with discomfort? I had 3 poems that were really on my mind when I wrote this next poem. The first was a poem by Danez Smith. There's a line where he says, "You're the only one thing for miles and the only thing that can't shine," which is just crushing. And I have 2 really great friends and poets on this call to. Christy Macaron wrote in her book Recipe for Time Travel in Case We Lose Each Other, which is fantastic, and I really recommend that you check it out. Her poem, An Elegy, which is it's a poem about a volcanic eruption. And the line is, "We cannot forget, we ignore things until they are beautiful," which is also just devastating because the beautiful things are often not the ones that need our attention. My other good friend, Rachel, who wrote her book, What Kind of Seed Made You? Also, please check it out, and I will put these links in the chat after. Her opening poem in her book on visiting Joshua Tree while 2 simultaneous bushfires burn in thermal California. The line that killed me was 200 years to grow and only 20 minutes to burn down. Just, the urgency, the unfairness, but, where should we be putting our attention, like how brief things are. So that vulnerability and need for connection, the need to be able to sit with other people's pain, and not wait just for the pretty moment or the convenient moment, is where this poem came from. Oranges for breakfast. This year craves solace more than language. Tongue and mouth sit in separate pink fields. Yes, I can say, look, dew froze over, eucalyptus lay cut and exhaling, but that doesn't turn the earth greener or less fearful. Hours ago, old night brought its tokens to usher us on, yet you stood it down and lit the windows, like there's a word for that, your body hinging open to mine, and despite the work of Frand, morning arrives bitter as citrus. The ironic thing about this collection was that it was intended to be a book about Seattle poems. And I worked on that for about 6 months, and they all were terrible. They were so bad. They were just bad poems. And I scrapped them all. I saved a couple lines, but I realized I don't write really well when I'm writing about a place that I'm currently in. I need some distance, I think. So they just didn't work. Save you all the headache and the heartache that I had throwing all of those away. But one made it, and it's this one, because I think it still maintained the fairy tale elements. It had the same heart as the rest of the poems that later on were written. This is not a crow story. 11 at night, still a strip of orange ignites mountains I can't yet name. Above the lapping bay of helicopters and possessive northwest crows. Difference between crows and ravens are crow's size and bill and throat feathers. Difference between blood and feather is a matter of beating or flapping, but both are mysterious work. Are you keeping notes? Both crows and ravens have something to say in stories. One tells the truth. I'd pluck out my feathers and recite the name for every mountain, but most here are volcanoes, heights pumice and obsidian and ancient above the bay, where sailboats flicker and strain, more wind than rope. Along with the themes that I have already mentioned, there's some family poems in here as well, poems about daughterhood and motherhood, about fathers and grandmothers, and I wanted to read a grandmother poem. I was really inspired by Ocean Vuong and his poems about family and memory and time. His poems on Earth were briefly gorgeous. He has a line that it's that to say your name is to hear the sound of clocks being turned back another hour. Just brilliant. Like, it's unfair how great that line is. It's the sense of being like, not only you're transported to a different time through the memory of another person, but it's this, you're given more time because of what they've given you. It's just so rich and so subtle and simple, but wonderful. So this is a grandmother poem, and this one is called Nona. How to master the magic of old women without any suffering, without a dim house simmering garlic and oil at dinner. How to conjure gazelles and slap cheeks for color and never buy a new coat, just learn the blind helm and lock stitch. How to raise children who forget they ever grew inside a haphazard body, forget they were coins tossed at the world. How to win card games and the favor of saints, all magic too, but burned and blind. How to be just like this, the one tower in a valley calling for lightning. The next poem I wrote right during the invasion of Ukraine, and I was kind of struck when I was rereading this collection that I reread it and I thought of Palestine, I thought of Congo, I thought of a lot of tragedy and just ugliness that's happening right now. And I wanted to read it in light of those things happening now. 41 weeks and reading the war. Bombs are grotesque, but so are bouquets home to keep, and women have no borders but their own to declare welcome. Lines drawn like a sieve for song. We keep breathing, opening fleshy wet valves, sending music skyward to subway acoustic domes, train stations where mothers leave strollers, the underground for babies born womb to wound. Or make it simpler, call this anthem, flag, flower, the sun up and fields, small future planted in exploded soil, a country like all miracle relies on disbelief. The last part of the book. It's broken up into thirds, but the last third is what I want to end on. These are the poems that break away from the stagnation. And they're poems about reconciliation and reconnection and reunion. And it's about not only having the ability to connect with other people as you're re-entering the world and redefining those relationships, but also having the ability to be more honest with yourself and who you are now. Allow yourself some growth, allow yourself to be more honest. So this poem called Reckless Objects, this one, I have to say, the opening is a complete allusion to Heather Crystal's poem, Perfect Song. Her stuff is so great. In her poem, Perfect Song, it starts out with the narrator who is drunk and walking through a blizzard to get home. And she's listening to music on her Walkman and she hears the perfect song. And then she spends weeks after trying to figure out what song it was and she can't find it. She's like flipping back through. She's like, it's not on here. How's that possible? And the end of the poem says that what I had taken to be the song was in fact the joyous concordance of a moment that would not come again. Amazing. So a little allusion to being in the snow. Reckless objects. And also appreciating your community and your friendships. Tell me what reckless object I am if your eyes are a blizzard in April and walking through it hungover. Your face the bottom of a bowl revealed from oil by last tear of crust. Your arms flashlights against stucco in a hurricane. Your voice an absurd wait through opening credits. Your touch is, what's the name of that actress? I love her in everything. Seeing you cross-legged on the porch playing spades is a clean bill of health. Your braided hair a nest of some mythological bird. Your mouth a housewarming inaccessible. Your walk toward me a laser, redder than a bowl of cherries. You sifting me in your sight is a fable with no translation. The poem that's tucked right next to that one is called Translations. And this was a poem more about self-awareness, forgiveness. And this was the last poem I wrote for the collection, although it's not the last one in the book. But I wrote it right around my daughter's first birthday. And I tend to be more creative around birthdays and holidays and annual events. And I don't know if that's something about tradition or reflection that happens at that time. But yeah, just an interesting thing I've noticed with how I work. Translations. You can say I am grieving, or we've stumbled into the dark, wet room. You can say we can't sleep because children refuse, or our shadows are restless without care for us. You can say in winter the sun sets too early, or the earth turns against us. You can say, what if I try but I'm still a bad person, or untwist taffy and hold it in your mouth until it's soft enough to swallow like a small heart. The final poem I'll read is the last poem in the book. And I'm not going to give it an explanation. I've always just kind of liked it. It kind of wrote itself kind of mysteriously, and I don't really want to detract from the magic of that. It just always felt like the appropriate place to land. So I'm just going to read it and let it breathe. Quiet anniversary. I'm not about to start loving in a way that is really about forgetting. It's winter, so remote, not even wind can find us. Flower dust, the table, the sky fills with planes. I keep the list of what makes us alive on my tongue, the brightness, the sour. What good is gratitude if it splits a body open and burns down the pretty house? I count the planes. It's cold enough, but I still know which number you are. What miraculous arrival. Still let frost gather like a curious touch on a year of flames. Thank you.
Give it up for Amanda, please, in the chat. Let me bring myself up here. It's such an incredible book. So we're gonna do a little Q&A with our author here. I do have some curated questions, but if anyone has anything that they would like to ask, please put it in the chat. I would love to get to it. I'd love to have audience questions too. So if you want to participate in the conversation, please do. But with that, yeah, I have a couple things. And I think what I want to start with is I always find it fascinating how different poets and authors kind of arc their books, especially poets. And here we do, you talked about it a little bit already. I was all I loved your little intros, but I was like, God damn it, I'm like kind of like marking off questions. Like, I don't even know if I'm gonna have anything to ask. But no, you talked about it a little bit, but just the whole fact that you have the time, the heat, the incandescence. And so I'm just curious, in terms of what was your criteria throughout the ordering process, in terms of like, how did you decide which poems, in terms of like their imagery, their language, the metaphors, in terms of like where you place them within the collection?
No, that's a really good question. I think that was the question I was asking myself when I was trying to put the book together. I basically, when I'm ordering anything, and when I edit anything, I just print everything out, and then I throw it on the ground, like in no order. And then I just start reading things, and things that seem to sort of not exactly be the same, because that's just boring to read a group of poems that are kind of the same right in a row. But certain poems that just sort of like bang off of each other, or just like it's so hard to explain. It's you just sort of start reading it out loud, just reorder things. I had several different versions of this book, but the best way that I found to do it was just put all the poems on the ground, literally, and then just start rearranging them.
Honestly, what I learned from a old college professor at Bridgewater State, my pal Josh Shavery in the crowd would know, is that a lot of things are intuition. You know, it's just certain things click, and you know it clicks, and that's very valid. Absolutely. So kind of going off of that a little bit, I love the language throughout this book, and I'm very curious because a lot of it is about motherhood, and I want to know a little bit, how has motherhood helped you progress as a poet, and in what ways has it evolved your use of language and your ability to express yourself to the world?
That's a great question. I found after my son I couldn't write at all. I went for a year, didn't do anything. Brain didn't work, nothing. I was just so focused on keeping this new little person I loved alive as much as possible. And then with my daughter, when I was pregnant with her, I just had this huge burst of creativity. But I think my son had started to teach me how to be present in the world in a way that was, you're in reality, but also you're completely living this parallel but yet simultaneous imaginary world, because that's just how kids are. So seeing him, experience like these little joys and like these little discoveries, or like seeing how he would compare things and relate things, really like kicked off this other creative part in my brain that I hadn't been able to access when he was very young. But when he was a toddler, I was like, oh, I remember how to do this now. And then I just kind of let go of this idea that you have to sequester yourself away, and then you have to be like very like dialed in and secluded and write for 3 hours and get something really done and finished. I just started writing on my notes app on my phone.
Yeah.
Which felt like, to me, honestly, at the beginning, like I'm cheating. Like, this is not what writers do. And it felt awful to do it. And then at some point I'm like, you know what? Who cares? I'm getting something done. Like, I can come back, I can edit this. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can reconstruct it as we go along. And then just kind of valuing your time. You just have less time as a parent. So you kind of have to make do with what you have. And once you realize that, and you take the pressure off of yourself, and then you're so much freer to create without any sort of judgment. So I think having kids has helped me become a better writer for sure.
That's beautiful. I love that. So I'm curious, obviously in the book you have such a way with using the actual fairy tale language throughout the book that I think is such a like beautiful remix in a lot of ways. And so I'm wondering, I know you talked about some of the poetic influences, but can you talk a little bit more about some of the actual fairy tales, like story influences throughout the book?
Sure. I grew up in Eastern PA, and some of my earliest memories are like having this PA Dutch presence around constantly. Like you have there's a poem in here that I didn't read, but talking about like barns with the disselphanks on them, and like the hex signs, and holidays were always really important to us. Traditions were always really important. Storytelling through our grandparents, and just having this idea of, tropes that are kind of universal because they're so true, that you can find in almost any culture, in almost any family. And I've always been really fascinated with repurposing them and placing them in a way that's slightly unexpected but still rings very true. So yeah, those were the big influences for those.
And please, if anyone has any questions too, feel free to throw them out. So I'm curious, I always ask this of just different authors, but I'm always curious because once your book is out into the world, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, some people can get whatever they want from a certain poem, right, to a degree. And so I'm curious though, for you as the actual poet, as the actual author, what do you hope folks take away, especially with regards to love, motherhood, family, and living your life with your fullest glow?
It's a great question. I think I was thinking that too, even when I reread it, to prepare for this, because I got different things from it.
Yeah.
It's 2.5 years since I wrote some of these. I really just think allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing yourself to have an honest perspective of yourself is very important. Giving yourself patience is important. And all those things, like whether you're a mom or a dad or just, a spouse or just person in the world, I think all of that is just incredibly important. And I think we experience kind of like the inability to access each other for so long during the pandemic, and then like the awkwardness of trying to get back to, oh, how do I do this? How do I just even simply interact with someone? How do I not be like freaked out in crowds? How do I feel safe taking my kids into crowded places? All of that. But I think having some trust in yourself, having trust in people around you, is pretty essential. And I hope that's what comes through in the book, to kind of move beyond that fear and get to a place that's more accepting and more confident and vulnerable at the same time.
I absolutely think it achieves that. We actually now, we got a couple questions in the chat. I love it. Oh my God, they're coming in. Wow. All right, so Barbara asks, you said that you have bursts around milestones, etc. Do you find a time of the day in particular to spark your creativity? Early morning, twilight, before sleep?
I like morning a lot. Thanks for your question, Ann Barb. I like morning a lot. I feel like when you just come out of a dream state, and I have super clear dreams, I wish I didn't sometimes, because it feels like I'm living like another life, and I just wish I could turn my brain off and go to sleep. The plot driven dreams I have, it's exhausting. But when you wake up from it, you do have all these new ideas. You have the whole day ahead of you. You have expectations. Plans, things you need to get done, and all that potential I find is great fodder just to play with. And then to start with even one simple idea, and then have it just tinkering around in your brain for the rest of the day and picking and pulling at it and shaping it. So morning is great for that.
Absolutely. I love a good ruminate, a little rumination. So Rachel asks, I love how much others' work and how different that work has inspired you. What kinds of books and poems are inspiring you now?
I've been trying to read more short stories right now. After writing all the poems, I kind of wanted to see if I could write short stories again. Claire Van Watkins, she's great. She writes a lot of Nevada stories that are just, the classic, your place is just as much of a character. Your location is just as much of a character as anyone else. She's amazing. I was rereading Heather Crystal a lot coming into this, and her poems, she writes a lot of prose poems, not necessarily something that I aim to write, but they're so different than what I would be, trying to achieve, that it's interesting and different. There's a poet, Sarah Galvin, who hasn't written a ton of books, but she was local in Seattle for a little bit. And their stuff is really, really interesting. too, and strange and funny, and comic and comedic, and that's been nice. But honestly, like a lot of the time, I just watch shows on TV, and I'm like, oh, I want to take that dialogue. Like I want to take this weird conversation that's happening. I mean, I'm still sad that Succession's over because I just could live in that dialogue all the time. We're watching a show called Bodies right now, which is a time travel show of 4 different timelines, and the same body is found in the same street over a period of like 100 years. So I love time travel. I love all those shows, and that just opens up my creativity.
Beautiful thing. So John asks, do you remember the moment of coming up with the tower wanted to be struck by lightning line? Was it pure flow state, or were you more aware of it / working at it, and how good it is in the moment?
Thanks. I'm glad you liked it. No, it was flow state. I honestly, I don't remember writing a lot of my poems, to be honest with you. I remember editing them, but for the most part, writing anything, I don't know what it is, but it's really great, and I'm not trying to figure it out. Like I try to think about this as little as possible, because I do feel there's something intuitive and instantaneous that happens, and it's just, your subconscious making all these connections, or it's like your internal ear hearing like, oh, that sounds right, but that's good. And then after, I mean, oftentimes it's a mess, and you have to clean it out and like rearrange the furniture to make the room look nice. But most lines that hit like that, I wish I could say I intentionally did it, but I did not. I just didn't delete it. So.
I love that. No, 100%. Again, sometimes it's just like that intuition, and then you come back, you're like, oh wow, that's pretty fantastic. Pat on the shoulder. And Josh says, Manda short story collection coming 2025. I can see it already. That's not a question, but I am going to add a question mark to it. So we'll come back to that. So I'll see you in 2025 with that.
Yeah, also.
All right, I got a couple more for you, and then we'll wrap it up here. So one actual line that really struck me came towards the very end of the collection from Quiet Anniversary, and it was that line about I'm not about to start loving in a way that is really about forgetting. And I love how that actually really comes throughout the rest of the poems. Like you really do kind of build upon that idea through the duality of the way that you introduce some of the things that are happening in the world, but at the same time you're trying to raise kids, have a family, and exist in this other dual reality of what's really going on. And I love that line in particular just so much, and I resonated with it because I think that's just the truth of it, right? That's how we really need to be out here. And so I'm curious for you, as someone that's doing this just like we all are, but what are your rituals, whether that be in your life, things that you do, and in your writing, that help you to succeed in that, to continue to be in that faith that you kind of constructed here?
That's a good question too. I think you're kind of living off of the high of making one good thing. Make one good thing, and that gives you the confidence to try and make another good thing. And you're gonna make a whole bunch of bad things in between, things that don't work, and but that's kind of like how you just get up and live your life anyway, right? Like you have a good day, and that encouraged to get up and let's do it again, and then sometimes you just have crappy days. But I think just having some sort of faith that I think about this Vonnegut quote all the time about how all art is good art. It's worth doing. It's just worth doing, like for the human soul, for the human condition. You really can't make bad art. You have people that disagree with your art, but if you're making it, there's something about the act of creating something that's just really transformative to yourself and nurturing for yourself. So that's kind of why I do it. Like if I don't at least try and make something every day, I kind of get kind of bummed out. But it's easier now because now I can make drawings with my kids in the morning, and even that feels good. Just make stuff. It's great.
I couldn't agree more. And just to close out here, so I'm just curious, for all the fools out here like myself, who do we actually trust, the raven or the crow?
Mm,
The actual answer to that. And that was also one of my favorite poems, by the way.
thank you. Meanwhile, I'm quickly putting in some links to some books that I hope you all can check out, that are amazing. Oh, the raven. There is the right answer. This one is a trickster. Um, I wouldn't trust any of them. I think everyone has an angle, which is what I would say. And if you're being told that someone tells the truth and the other does not, I think they're both lying. That's my answer.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take it. I'll take that. Well, that is our little show for this evening, folks. We really appreciate you coming out for the release of Glowing Animals. Amanda, thank you so much. It was truly just a beautiful, beautiful, if you can say, incandescent reading that we got tonight. And yeah, there's a lot going on in the world, folks, and I think that's why this book is really apt for tonight in a lot of ways. And you kind of touched on it, Amanda. We thank you so much for taking a breath with us today. We hope you're doing what you can to take care of yourselves, to be in community, to be in solidarity where you can with the folks that need it, because the ever the ever persistent battle with the 100-armed giant that is imperialism continues. uh but that's why we're here, is to remember exactly why we're doing that for, right? It's for this fantasy that should not be a fantasy, of a truly beautiful, just, and fair world where we can have our families, have our love, have everything that we so rightly deserve. And with that, I just want to get a little something from you all. I know this will just be in the chat, but can I get a little for liberation in the chat? Because that's why we're here. We are here to be the glowing animals that we deserve to be. So thank you all so much. Have a great and wonderful evening.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate you all coming.